Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about what is an illusion. Now, I remember 5-6 years ago in the pre-COVID times, I had talked on Twitter and caused a little bit of a stir for those days because I said that what most folks in the visual perception world call an illusion is, I think, mistaken. Now, the very simplest way to say what an illusion is to say what you perceive is not reality, right? Now, the problem with that is that, well, right now, right, you're watching me on a computer screen or a phone, and you're getting an intense feeling of 3D-ness and of me being right here in front of you. In fact, you move around. I mean, it's got all of these facets of three-dimensionality and so forth. That's really visceral, relatively speaking. But of course, it's not real. But none of us would go around saying, "Oh my God, I saw this illusion." And in fact, it's a really powerful illusion. So much so that we don't even consider an illusion. But I think that's really not. I mean, obviously, we use the word illusion in many senses, but I think the way in which it really matters for understanding psychology and perception is not just that your perception differs from reality. And I want to try to make that clear in a couple of different ways. One is by virtue of just phones and televisions. The other is any kind of just photo that you look at. Again, as an example, and we don't consider these things to be illusions. In fact, it could turn out that all of these years you've been, in fact, like in the Matrix or something like this. And in fact, what you were seeing all of this time wasn't reality at all. And there's a sense in which, so what? I mean, you weren't having an illusion all of those times. Yeah, it turns out you weren't perceiving reality the entire time, but it's not like you were perceiving an illusion, right? You were seeing things the way, well, let me get that into a minute. I think key here, let me go ahead and say, key as to what makes it not an illusion is that your brain is receiving stimuli and it is correctly interpreting the stimuli. Right? When you receive stimuli, there's always some probability distribution of what things in the world could have caused that evidence, that stimulus on your eyeball, right? And so there's a probability distribution of it could be this, or it could be that. If it's a Necker cube, a Necker cube is just the case of an ambiguous cube, and you can see it as one way or the other way. In that case, it's 50-50. Most of the time, life isn't like that. It's not like the rabbit versus duck or witch, old hag versus young lady kinds of images where they're 50-50ish. You can see them one way and then you just stalt and you see it the other way. Real life really isn't like that. Real life has so many stimuli that it effectively makes it unambiguous, so that it's 99.999% that it's Mark Changizi talking in front of you right now. Now it turns out your brain's wrong. I'm not, in fact, in front of you right now. But the stimuli are consistent with that, right? So it's not like your brain is making a mistake. It's not like you've been tricked. So that's another way of trying to get across the idea that these aren't what illusions aren't what we mean when we say there's an illusion occurring. Another way to say this is that a lot of the folks that play the kind of illusion game that I don't think is really illusions are the folks that set up an environment. And let me show you an example where I did it in moment number 88. Let me just let you see it here. In fact, compared to the American edition, it's in fact tiny. So there, I had rigged the environment so that the big book, the big English version of Vision Revolution, was really far back, far away, but looked to be sitting adjacent to the really tiny Japanese translation of Vision Revolution. So I've rigged it such that the stimuli suggested that they were in fact side by side, and the English version was much smaller, than the Japanese version, right? I didn't have to know anything about your brain. I didn't have to be a wizard in some sense, like know things about perception and vision and human brains or mammalian brains or anything. All I did was have to say, well, I know that the stimuli that would have happened for one big book or one small book sitting next to another bigger book would have to be this. And so I'm just going to reproduce that in a tricky way to make it a sort of a tricky version of that. So it's just bring one book really far away and set it up. But I can do that without knowing anything about the mind that I'm trying to trick, right? As long as the mind is just interpreting the world and seeing just directions from which things are coming in projective space, sort of this visual projective space, and just sees projected angles and so forth, and all the ways that any kind of camera system would, it's going to interpret the stimuli in exactly that way. Those aren't illusions in the strong sense that makes it even worth talking about illusions, right? You're experiencing it right now, it doesn't count as an illusion. We could have all been experiencing it our whole life. None of us would say, oh my God, I was an illusion the whole time. I mean, some weak sense, but no. And in the case that I just showed you, which a lot of these variants on these sorts of cases are, all that has been done is rigging the stimuli to suggest another scene, another real world scene, that it's in fact not. And I don't have to know anything about the brains of my victim, so to speak. Now, this is in complete contrast to certain kinds of stimuli, which, when you have a perception, your perception that you get isn't even consistent with the stimulus that you're getting on your eye, right? In all the other cases, there was always two, let's say, perceptions that you could have. Each of them are consistent with the evidence, consistent with what's coming onto your eyeball, like the Necker cube, for example, or those books. But there are whole hosts of illusions where you have an illusion due to peculiar natures of how you process, how our brains process visual stimuli, whether it's in the eyeball or in the brain. And those peculiarities that you have to know about, or you've accidentally stumbled upon. Right? So these are cases where what you perceive is not even consistent. It's not one of the possible solutions. It's not like you would say, okay, given the evidence that I've gotten, here's all the things that could have caused, here's all the worlds that could have sent that light to my eye just like that. And I'll pick the one that's most probable. In these kinds of illusions that I'm about to show you, you're perceiving something that's not even one of the things that could have sent that stimuli to you, right? Now, for example, if you know Kitaoka has lots of great illusions, and I'll just throw some of them on the page here. I got to meet him and spend a day with him in Japan many years ago when I was invited there for a talk. He's both sort of an artist and a scientist, and he's got a really good head for creating stimuli that are massively illusory, and you're perceiving them to move despite them having no motion signal. You're perceiving them to buckle, or all these different kinds of things that they do. None of those things are consistent with any possible interpretation about what's actually in that stimulus. Now, here's a case of mine. You should perceive these things as just flowing outwards. These little blurs as flowing outwards in your visual field, but they're not. Let me just start, before I get into why these things are fundamentally different, let me just give you a simple case like the Orbison illusion or the Hering illusion, like this one. It's just two vertical lines and with sort of spokes in the background. Now, the stimulus coming towards you is just two vertical lines, right? But you're perceiving them to be bowing outwards. That is, you're perceiving the very stimulus. You would have to say that the very stimulus coming to get to my eye appears to be bowed. In fact, so I've talked about this in earlier videos, and also there's a TED talk on my grand unifying theories of why we see perceptual illusions. What you are perceiving in these kinds of geometrical illusions, as well as a huge generalization beyond them, you're perceiving not the way the world is when it sent the stimuli to your eye. You're perceiving the world the way it will be in the next moment were it the kind of stimuli you think it is. And namely, in this case, those optic radial lines suggest that you're moving forward. Those are optic blur lines that you get in normal life. They're exaggerations of it. In the next moment, I would be moving forward, in which case those two vertical lines, let's say the sides of a doorway would have flowed outward in my visual field, and then they would, in fact, in the next moment, have those bowed-like features, because in your visual field, the way the projective geometry works is such that they truly would be geometrically bowed, but they're not now, right? I am perceiving something that's inconsistent with the very stimulus that I'm receiving. Now, there's a good evolutionary reason for it, but it's not like these other illusions which I'm claiming aren't illusions. And many of the other kinds of deeper illusions have to do with specific ways that we process specific, either they're just quirks, in some cases it could just be quirks and you're hacking into the quirks, in some cases it could be highly designed things that you're tapping into, like in these geometrical illusions. And so in some sense they're relying upon peculiarities of our mechanisms in our brain, rather than just rigging the room to trick the camera. which is an entirely different kind of thing, and I would say isn't illusory at all. All right. If you're interested in visual perception and illusions, I recommend my earlier book, bestseller, Vision Revolution. Go get a copy of that. I really think you will enjoy it. That was your science moment.